I'm Greg, that's Jim.
Hello?
You paid good hard-earned money tonight. I suppose you're expecting some answers about the future of music and what exactly it is. And
We should have picked a bigger subject.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
I can guarantee you that, unfortunately, if you're looking for the answer, we don't have it. Anybody
You
who
can ask
says
for a
that-
refund now.
Yeah, exactly. Now's the time. But we are going to try to look ahead and see some possibilities, because one of the things that's exciting to Jim and I is that this is, as journalists, which we've been all our lives, this is an incredible time in history right now. Everything's changing. Everything's up for grabs. The last 10 years, there's been more changes in the way people make, distribute, and access music than at any time in history. And the next 10 years are even going to be crazier from that regard. Jim, I think we got to take a look back to understand where we are now. Let's go back 12 years to 1999 and think about the way music was made and distributed back then.
Well, I think it's more interesting to talk about the way it was consumed. I mean, you know, we are music geeks. We live this. We love it. We talk about it. We write about it. I mean, I don't care how obscure an act I mentioned to you. Les Butcherettes, one of my favorite bands of the year so far, group from Mexico City, a trio led by this woman, Terry Genderbender. If they had not told you to turn off your cell phones within 30 seconds, you could all have that music. Back in the old days, 1990, wow. You know, I mean, you would have to scour the import bins of Reckless Records. You know, there used to be these things called record stores. We still have a couple of them in Chicago, thankfully. You know, and maybe they would have 1 or 2 copies of that record on import. If you were someone who lived, you know, in the woods, you know, Aberdeen, you know, Washington, you know, you're a young kid named Kurt Cobain, you know, if Walmart didn't sell it, you had to buy it via mail order from you know, the back of a fanzine, you know, order from this tiny independent label, some obscure record you wanted, you know, and now there's nothing so obscure, and it's not just our art form. I mean, if I was teaching art history and I said the Laocoon, you know, a classic antiquary statue, you know, we could have 10,000 Google images of it immediately. No going down to the library and having to get a copy of the book. There's nothing I can throw at you in pop culture today, no film, no movie, no book, that you can't have instant access to it. I think that is so big that we forget what a story that is. No time in history, as Greg said. You know, the recorded music is a mere 130 odd years old. 1877, the introduction of the phonograph. Okay? You know, and now it's being completely rewritten. Against great odds, you know, the business model is being rewritten against great odds, and with the industry kicking and screaming, just as it did in the 1890s and the early 1900s, because, you know, those wax cylinder recordings that Mr. Edison had invented or perfected were going to put bands out of business. And we've heard this again and again. And then those more perfect 78 RPM platters were going to put bands out of business, and radio was going to put, you know, music out of business, and then home taping was going to kill music. You know what? Music is more alive today than ever. The thing that is going out of business is the big bad companies that have tried to screw it up for the last 100 years.
Well, the point being that with every technological change, the industry, the entrenched industry, was crying foul, basically saying you're going to kill whatever's left of music. People are going to be less, they're not going to have the incentive to go out and see live music when the phonograph was invented. They're not going to want to go out and buy music when the cassette was invented, because people could just tape all the music they wanted, right? Every time these changes took place, people became more passionate about music, more people had access to music, people ended up buying more music. What we're seeing now in the last 11 years, okay, the explosion of not only digital downloading, but devices to play them on. So you think about Apple and you know, the revolution it created by inventing the iPod. I mean, the first year of the iPod, sales actually declined. They were selling in the tens of thousands. But in the last decade, now the iPod has sold over 300 million. There have been over 300 million iPods alone that have been sold. So people say, well, there's no money in the music industry. I mean, you know, Apple begs to argue differently. The iTunes store, 16 billion songs have been downloaded from the iTunes store. Now, so there is an industry, there is an economy accruing around music. The question that I have is that what the digital revolution has done, giving all these people access to music more readily than ever in the history of mankind. You know, Jim was talking about these record stores and the search you would have to go on to find something that you coveted. I can remember spending sometimes months, even years, going after something that I really wanted to acquire and could never find it anywhere. When I would finally find it, it was like finding the Holy Grail. You know, it was like, oh my God, I got that art rock B-side by this German band Neu, you know, from 1973, and I can't believe I found it.
We
You know?
argue about this. See, he values the search for it, and I want instant gratification. I just wanted the music.
You're living in the right time.
You know, you and your virgin vinyl, and you finally
Well,
found
you know,
it.
if you like, if you, you know, back when I had free time, you could spend 8 hours in a record store, and that's how you'd spend your Saturday. You know, that's the kind of loser I was. But
I just want to hear the music.
I loved it. But the point is, now you can, you know, at a touch of a button, you can say, you know, I want to hear that. What's that all about? I heard these two guys pontificating on this radio show. I want to hear that song. You can get it instantly. Now, the convenience and portability of music right now, you know, facilitated by this container that's about the size of a cigarette box, you can have all this music anywhere you want. And what I'm questioning is the convenience and portability trumping the actual value of the music? Is the thing that plays the music actually cooler than the music itself? Because you think about kids these days, you know, those damn kids. They got that iPod and they cherish that thing. If you lose it, it's like taking out a lung or an arm, you know? But 10,000 songs get wiped out, oh, I can get 10,000 more in a few hours. No problem. It's like turning on the faucet. So you kind of wonder, what kind of value are they placing on the music? Because it seems to be there everywhere, and it is. It can be easily accessed anytime, anywhere, any place, and it's only going to get more accessible. Because now the iPod sales are starting to decline for the first time in a decade.
Because everybody has three.
Everybody has three, and they're being replaced by the iPhone. There's Apple again. Or your Android phone, you know, whatever. Your phone is soon going to be the center of your entire life. Your phone is going to be basically going to be able to do everything for you except wash your car. And that's the world we are starting to live in. So music is just going to be a small piece of that, but the access to the music will be there. We got these cloud-based systems that we're talking about now. Instead of having the music tethered to your hard drive on your computer, you're going to have it in that digital cloud up there. And it's essentially a locker, a storage locker, that will be able to hold every piece of music that has ever been recorded in the history of mankind is going to be available for streaming at any time, anywhere, any place on the planet. That's the kind of future we're looking at.
We disagree about this, too. His basement has about 4 rooms, you know, about as big as this stage, that are, you know, he's sick. He's got a sickness. You know, Gordon Lightfoot, a perfectly fine folk musician, you know, wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Who doesn't like that, right? You know, everybody should have one best of Gordon Lightfoot CD. He's got all 18 albums the guy ever made, plus the best of, plus the box set. I had to move.
I can't help myself.
I had to move 7 times in the last 12 years. Now, I've come to embrace this sort of Zen Buddhist thing. You know, I don't want to be defined. I don't want to be a slave to my possessions. I'd like to get rid of all those 10,000 CDs I have and not have to move them again. The idea that I could just tap into wherever I am, you know, on a beach, in vacation, you know, on vacation in Italy, you know, at work, at school, into the cloud, my digital storage locker is a tremendous thing. I do think, and I think it's a good thing for our planet. I think we're hurtling toward a world where we're all going to have to downsize, but everybody will still have that one IKEA bookshelf where you have the 7 or 8 like key hardcover books that define you, you know, My On the Road, you know, by Kerouac, right? And you have maybe, you know, 50 or 60, you know, vinyl albums, because that's the way to really own it, right? You know, and that's your like little mini museum that defines who you are. And then the rest of everything else in the universe and popular culture we can access with a button.
Well, you see, you're such an idealist. I really think that 12-year-old kid right now isn't thinking about anything physical. I mean, the only physical thing he wants is that little thing to play it on, because everything else is going to be digital and it's going to be accessible to him. He doesn't have to own anything per
Well,
se.
that's good.
Anything physical.
And it's green and everything.
And he's going to
too.
be able, and you know what? You know what it's like moving as many records as I have? I mean, you never want to move again. But the kid, 10 years from now, you're going to be able to move your entire collection of everything you've ever owned or wanted to own, in a second, because it's all going to be in this little box.
Yeah.
You're going to have access to it, which, that's a cool thing. But the thing is, does that make the stuff that you access somehow more disposable, more of less value to you, because
I
you
don't think
don't
so.
have it on the
We
shelf?
talked to the real crowd here at Francis Parker a year or two ago, and whenever we do this to a high school or college audience, we're done, and there's instantly those 8 or 12 kids who want to ask us like 100 questions because they want to off us and take our job. I think that the select, there's always going to be a fraction of the audience who define their very lives and existence by music, or by ballet or by film or whatever their passion is. And then there's other people for whom it is just entertainment. As critics, I think there's one rare thing we agree on. We both have fairly thick skins. A lot of people disagree with us all the time. The 14-year-old Justin Bieber fan and the 68-year-old Rolling Stone fan both are convinced we don't know our ass from our elbow. And that's fine. We welcome that. We think that criticism is a great discussion. But one thing we agree on is the only thing you can really say that gets us upset is that music is mere entertainment. We hate that notion. Music is life. Music is everything. And I don't see that being devalued.
I want you to talk about, we just talked about this on the show, actually, but the other change that's coming along is that not only is the way music is being accessed and distributed, that's been the big change in the last 10 years. Now we're starting to see artists changing the way they make music. And we just talked about the Björk album.
Yeah, with
Ophelia.
Bjork, putting together this multimedia presentation. It's a video, it's a movie, it's apps
Cell
for
phone
your
app.
iPhone.
Yeah.
It's programs. She's inviting you to remix these songs. Artists are having to think outside the box. If we go back to the phonograph, only dates to 1877. People were not starting to make money from recordings, and by people I mean the industry, until about 30 or 40 years in. So this notion that you should record your music and get paid for it is really about a century old. And I said it wasn't really the artist that ever made any money. When Madonna's CDs would sell in the 16 million per hit album, she was making about 99 cents per $16 or $17 album sold. That's Madonna. If you're just the Flaming Lips, you're making pennies, 9 or 10 cents, okay? 9 or 10 cents. But they've advanced you a couple of $100,000 to make that recording and to buy the van that you need to go on tour and all this other stuff. And the way that the accounting has always been done for Robert Johnson after he sold his soul at the crossroads to the devil, or, for Justin Bieber, is that every paper clip, every piece of paper, every photo, everything they do, they charge back to you and you never get out of debt. So historically, musicians have never made money selling recordings, all but a select handful. Let us not cry for Sir Paul McCartney or Mick Jagger. But they are by far the minority. Musicians, from the beginning of time, have made money. The traveling troubadour in the Middle Ages went from village to village, and he sat down, and he put his hat down, he played his lute, and if he was any good, you gave him dinner or you put a coin in his hat. And if he wasn't, he had to get a new job. He better be a blacksmith. That's how it works today. Wilco, Jeff Tweedy, a fantastic band from Chicago, can sell out 4 nights at the Auditorium Theater. They can do that consistently at venues of that size for 150 or 200 nights a year. That's how they've always made their money. And it's going back to that because there are some things that this digital revolution cannot replicate. And one of them is being in the same room as music that's being made in the moment.
Yeah, and I think what we're seeing too is recorded music is becoming part of a broader palette of things that artists have to do in order to make a living. One thing that we've seen because of this is it's become decentralized. Just like everything else in the record industry, the idea of recording music, every kid can make an entire record in a day in his bedroom and distribute it from there. He can circulate it around the world, record it, distribute it, and he doesn't have to leave his bedroom. That's an extraordinary change. It's allowed everybody to make music. It was interesting. We had Brian Eno, this British producer artist, on our show a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about this idea of music now as this tropical rainforest, where you wander in and you literally can go anywhere with it. And all these little genres splicing together and all these new life forms being created in this very fertile environment that is kind of chaotic right now. But it's very exciting because you don't have a central path through that rainforest. It's not like the Beatles show up on Ed Sullivan and the next day they've got 70 million new fans because everybody in America is watching that. Those kind of phenomena don't occur anymore. It's more about that rainforest scenario where all these little pockets of creativity going on and all these little things splicing together, being created on a much lower level budget than ever before. It's much more, you can literally buy all the equipment you need to record music, for well under a couple $1,000 and make a fairly presentable recording that you can
what's
send
more,
out.
that MacBook has 100 times the power that the Beatles had at Abbey Road when they were making their records. And for that matter, it also has, it's the doorway to 100 times the power that Capitol Records ever had when it was putting out the Beatles or Frank Sinatra. That little machine can send music hurtling around the world. While Greg is being scolded, and I'm not, you'll notice. We haven't cursed yet, have we? We forget sometimes. Were you bad?
No, I have to
Did you sit
get
on
my
your
battery pack out of my
I should
pocket.
note we forgot to say this up top. We were so like psyched that,
Yeah.
that Mr. Moog opened for us that it's all downhill after that. We should note that usually up top we encourage you to be as impolite as possible. We'll wander and we'll ramble and we'll fill the hour, but we really would like you to shout out questions if we're not making any sense or you're full of shit.
Although
That's fine. We welcome that.
That was one thing that was whispered in my ear, is that we do ask that if you have questions, they do want you to
Come up
come
to
to
the
the
front.
microphone because they're recording this, so they want to preserve your questions for posterity. So if you wouldn't mind, we would like you to come up at any point, ask a question. We want you part of this discussion as quickly as possible. This is very informal, what we're trying to do here. And we're covering a lot of ground. We're not going to get to everything we want to cover in an hour, but we do want to address whatever concerns you may have. We have a plan, but this plan will take 3 weeks for us to get through. So,
Well, yeah.
cut to the chase and come to us and say, hey, guys, will you cut the BS and give us the goods
Well,
here?
yeah, or there might be particular things you're fascinated in. When it comes to the theme of this Humanities Festival, technology, and when it comes to the subject of our talk, I mean, obviously, by the time we get home tonight, there'll be 6 other developments.
Sure.
It is a fascinating time to be a music journalist and a music critic. I mean, I really think we're at an historic moment. I mean, that guy Gutenberg, 1492. I mean, nothing.
Didn't see this
big
coming.
deal. This. I mean, because it is a fundamental paradigm shift in humanity and how it deals with the arts.
It absolutely is. The multi-million-dollar question is, how do people get paid now? Okay, so I think that's the question that I think a
Was
lot
that your
of people
question?
are addressing. Yes.
How do I get paid?
Go ahead.
No, but if you wanted to get through that. It's this thing on?
No, it's going to be a long, go ahead.
How you get
Well-
paid is a long answer.
How you said that people will define themselves through music. I think that's really fascinating. And if you look at a lot of the iPods of people my age or younger, like you'd see on mine a lot of folk, a lot of hip hop, a lot of rock, a lot of oldies. It's really broad range, and I think that's not that uncommon these days. Do you think that people still define themselves as like, oh, I'm punk, I'm goth, I'm hip hop, as much as they used to, especially exclusively through music? And did that happen before? Is it happening more now? Just kind of like how do people still define themselves through music?
I think there's more niches than ever, and there's more like little subgroups of groups, subcultures for people to really hone in on, and you can get so deep into them now because of the access. The internet is creating these communities. I think it naturally creates these little cultures and niches. But I agree with you about the iPod thing, just in terms of the breadth of stuff that people are accessing. I just know for my own kids, I come back from work one day and, my oldest teenage daughter's got Billie Holiday and, Ella Fitzgerald scat singing, Mac the Knife with Count Basie's band. And I go, how do you know about Billie Holiday? She goes, Dad, everybody knows who Billie Holiday is. And I go, I didn't when I was 13, It's just this amazing ability to find oh, I like Beyonce doing this song, and oh, wait a minute, that's a song that Etta James did, 40 years ago. They can find that out instantly. So I think, it's really kind of a double-edged answer, because if you want that niche experience and that deep experience, you can find these communities of people, complete outsiders from all over the world much more instantly. But at the same time, if you can load up your iPod with 10,000 songs, you don't want 10,000 punk songs on there. At a certain point, you're going to branch out.
I would. Every time I see some, 14 or 15-year-old little goth girl with I just want to go up and hug her, I mean, she is declaring to the world that I stand for a certain set of values, as does the kid with the punk mohawk, as does, the hardcore hip-hop kid. And I admire that. It breaks my heart. I teach reviewing the arts. Essentially, I teach criticism at Columbia. And I just always know that the kid who answers when we talk at the beginning of the class, I listen to everything. You don't listen to everything. You're not listening to Stockhausen and Kelly Clarkson. I mean, you don't listen to everything. You listen to whatever's convenient. And that's the same sort of thing as the person who just consumes what's in front of them. They don't, we're in a city of incredible restaurants, right? And you eat at McDonald's 3 times a week. It's a shame. I think now, not you.
You're such an idealist. You're such an idealist. I love it. It's great.
Well,
but
yeah, but
you're talking like it's still 1997 or something like that.
Because we are people for whom music defines everything.
Yeah.
And I guarantee that if we were to en masse go down to Occupy Chicago right now, which would be a very good idea, and talk to, I bet you those people really do define themselves by what they're listening to. Some of them may suck. They may be listening to Hoobastank or some really bad jam band. But whatever. I mean, there's no way. We could certainly list what they're not listening to. Don't you think? And if we go to Pitchfork, we know what those people are not listening to. 11,000 people gathered in Union Park who stand for certain things and are a community that still defines themselves by music. Maybe it's by what they're not rather than what they are, because it's really hard to figure out what Bon Iver has in common with Wild Flag, and you like them both, and Pitchfork likes them both. But we certainly know what they're not, and what they're not is, Kelly Clarkson or Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber or, a whole universe of other music. They're not even Black Sabbath or other cool stuff that we would like.
Thanks.
Got another one over here?
Hi. I'm curious to know what you guys think about the fact that the way digital music is consumed today, it's often divorced from the album that it may have been conceived as a part of, and the fact that it's often divorced from the people who created it or the title or any other sort of useful information that, that typically goes around a song.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, because a lot of artists have decided not to put their music on Spotify or iTunes because they don't want their music consumed piecemeal, which to me is a little precious, I mean, at the end of the day, do you want people to hear your music or don't you? Okay, you made your 3-hour concept album, and everybody has to listen to it consecutively in one sitting, otherwise they can't listen to it at all.
Yeah.
Give me a break, I
mean, for all the newness we're talking about and this historic moment in the history of mankind, which is all true, sometimes people are like forgetting history too, right? There used to be this thing called AM radio, right? And if all you liked was, Money Won't Buy You Love, you didn't want to buy Meet the Beatles, right? You could just listen to that on this little stupid thing, under your pillow at night. We romanticize it now. There always were singles. One of the things the music industry did to assure its extinction, and good riddance to it, is when vinyl 45s were replaced by CDs and cassettes at first, it first eliminated the cassette single, and then it eliminated the CD single. So now it was saying, we not only want your money, Jr., you love Justin Bieber, we don't only want your $3 for the 2 songs you love by him, and really it's 1 song and a B-side, right? You have to invest in $17, $18, the whole album. So there was a greediness
Well,
that, but that I just want this song audience always been there.
Imagine if Coca-Cola's marketing plan was, you know what, we're going to sell you Coke, but you can only buy the 64-ounce bottle. Sorry, you want a 12-ounce can.
No cans, no
can't
little
have,
bottles.
Not making those anymore. Got to buy the 64-ounce can,
Or nothing.
or nothing. And that's basically what the music industry said to consumers. You can only buy music in this one form. So the single is back. The individual track is back, which I think is a positive step. I think the whole idea of giving consumers a choice is a positive step. I think that was a huge error that the music industry made,
But the album certainly
dictated its own demise.
The album isn't dead. I mean, think about that word. Where does it come from? Album. Why do we call it an album? It's like a photo album. This was my vacation in Italy. I'm going to go to Greg's house and bore him to death and show him the pictures in the album. I put them together in a certain way. This was how we crossed Italy, right? This is an artist. Artists continue to want to put out collections of music that represent a certain time and place of where they were, just like a gallery showing might for a visual artist. And serious music consumers continue to enjoy consuming them in that way. By no means is the album dead. You have Pitchfork, the most successful music industry publication, startup, since a guy named Jan Wenner took a loan from his parents and started Rolling Stone in 1967, is devoted to unreadable 3,000-word, rhapsodic, spoutings of bullshit about albums. That's all they write about. It really is bad, Pitchfork.
Another question.
Going along with, like there's no more bookstores, there's not very many album stores. So when you go shopping, where do you go online? Beyond eMusic, beyond iTunes, beyond Spotify?
I'm glad you brought that up because I was just pulling up here. I lived in this neighborhood for a long time, and there was a Tower record store. I don't know if you guys remember.
Oh, so sad.
Right up the street here, right? And I'm just going, man, I can't even look at what's in that spot right now. I just don't even want to know because I spent so much time and so much money in that place, and just randomly walking through the store and discovering stuff. Like I said, I like to spend time in record stores. Now, and I believe I don't have that same experience, shopping online. I don't have the same visceral thrill doing it, so I do less of it. And again, we're critics. We get a lot of music sent to us, but even then, it wasn't enough. You always had to go out and get more. You wanted more. And when I go to Austin, Texas, for the South by Southwest Music Conference in March, I always stop at the Waterloo Record Store, which is one of the best record stores in the world. When I'm in LA or San Francisco, got to stop at Amoeba. Just got to go in there and walk out with some way more purchases than I intended on making when I walked in there. But in terms of accessing music now, frankly, I find myself the convenience of listening to the music in a digital format. Just having it online and being able to listen to stuff constantly coming through. I have to admit, I have this nice stereo, and I listen to a ton of music now, just over the speakers on the computer because it's easy.
What we've lost with the death of record stores, and we're extraordinarily lucky in Chicago. We forget this. We have a thriving community remaining of independent record stores here, and I mean more than a dozen excellent places, as good as anything in America.
Yeah.
It's not just a place to go and buy. You walk in there, and Tower Records was great, and it was a chain. But this Tower Records was great because a guy named Joe Cavidra was the manager, and he lived music 24/7, and he used to, write us all the time about why we were wrong about everything. And everybody he hired was just like him, and you could go in there and have conversations and meet people, and bands formed in record stores, and they sold books too, and it was a world, and we're losing those centers. We're losing. I always like to at some point bring up pornography because if you're talking about technology and the internet, let's face it, porn has led the way. It did. It was the revolution. It always is, right? There are certain things, and you think about if you're of a certain age, when you were 13 or 14 or 15, how difficult it was to buy a Playboy magazine, right, or a Penthouse magazine, right? And now you think about what can come in over your computer, like, oh my God, right? My point is that as much as all of that stuff is accessible, virtual, online, nothing beats being in the room with the person you are enamored of at the same place and time. There are some experiences you can just not have online that are not the same. And music, I think we're lucky enough to say, is one of those.
Yeah.
And that gets us back to live music being the heart and soul of what this always has been. It was a 1 century blip in history that people made money selling music.
Right. I mean, the whole idea of recorded content, of content period, copyrighted content, once any of that was digitized, you completely changed the game. And that music was first in. I remember coming, the
Well,
Tribune.
porn was first, and then music.
Well, but in terms of this massive change of just how music was accessed, I remember people in the marketing department of the Tribune coming to me 6, 7, 8 years ago as I was writing a lot about how Napster had completely upended the music industry. And by the way, it's literally lost like a third or 2/3 of its revenue in the last decade. You can make a correlation there between so-called illegal distribution of digital content to that decline in physical sales, which largely through CDs. You could make an argument that says the music isn't as good as it was. But the point is, they've lost a lot of revenue. There have been alternate ways of accessing this content, and you don't have to go to Sony Music, and you don't have to go to Tower Records to get it anymore. Music was first in. Movies, publishing, everything else that could be digitized, every copyrighted piece of material that could be digitized is following close at hand. So the big question is, how are creative people going to get paid? Now, for a musician, having that live gig experience that's your once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see that band on that night, and that cannot be digitized. Okay, even if you record it on your cell phone, it's not going to be as good on YouTube the next morning as it is being in that room with that band.
And this is not a change for the musician because 90%, if not more, of his or her income always has come from playing live.
Right. That's the big fallacy. It's like, oh, it's the bottom's dropped out. But when you think about it, the record industry gave the creative person, the band, the artist, a heap of money to make a record, which inevitably ended up getting poured right back into a big recording studio to record the record. So the musician, made some money off that advance, but at the end of the day, not a whole lot. And in terms of actually getting a royalty check in return for that recording that they made at the expensive studio, forget about it. 90 to 95% of the artists who ever have made a record in the history of the recording industry didn't get a royalty check. They never got paid for the recording. They didn't make enough to recoup the investment in their recording in order to start getting royalty checks. I mean, Roger McGuinn stands up at Congress, the Byrds recorded million-selling album after million-selling album, and testifies and says, I never received a royalty check from Columbia Records while we were recording these multi-million-selling records for them.
That's one of the most important bands of the 60s.
Right.
So imagine what kind of a chance you had if you're just the Flaming Lips or Wilco or any, and those are successful bands.
Right.
If you're Joe's band, you're so screwed it's not even funny.
So, sort of.
But not as screwed as newspapers.
Yeah. Well,
we should note that.
Believe me. Here's our live gig, right? So thanks for coming.
Yeah, what are we?
This is what we're down
That's
to right
it.
now.
Yeah, we got like 1 or 2 of these a year. Ain't gonna.
So to me, the big question in the last few years, right? The big question of the last few years.
We'll come to your house and read our review.
And if this keeps going the way it's going, it's this will be the last one this year. Yeah. But to me, the big question was Radiohead did an extraordinary thing with one of the biggest bands in the world, right? In 2007, putting out In Rainbows on their own website, basically offering it for free. Their publicity campaign consisted of a 1-sentence promotional statement on their website saying, "Hey, it'll be here in 10 days. Come back to this site." And there it was. You could get their entire new album for free, download it, and when it came to punching in the price, the response came back, "It's up to you," which I think that's the central question let's turn it into a question of the future. It's up to you to decide how these artists are going to get paid. And the question is, what's it worth to you? You know, that's really what the question is. What's it worth to you? It's the public radio model. As
Yeah, we like to think public radio got there first. If you like this, you donate and we give you a mug.
And here's the dirty secret about public radio. You know, they have a very dedicated group of listeners. But fewer than 10% of those very dedicated listeners, I'm talking about people who listen for hours a day, actually pay, actually contribute anything. So it's kind of an extraordinary number. When you think that, you know, most people think nothing of paying $3 or $4 for a cup of coffee a day, and yet use something like a resource like public radio, you know, multiple times during the course of a week and don't pay anything for it, it kind of tells you where, you know, maybe we take things for granted sometimes. Maybe we take creativity for granted. And I think that's a big question that, you know, perhaps maybe not so much the people in this room, because you're probably here because you're interested in this stuff and you're invested in it to a degree, but future generations, you kind of wonder, you know, how are they going to compensate these artists? I think it's a huge, huge question. You know, are we going to go back to the patronage system, you know, of Mozart's era, when, you know, the royalty basically underwrote, you know, the work of these great composers? And if so, how many of them will be funded in that way? The flip side of that is no creative person is ever entitled to a living. It's the reality check. We actually did one of these discussions in North Carolina a couple of years ago, and just a huge music community, you know, Chapel Hill, Raleigh area. Everybody's in a band. It's like in New Orleans, you know. Everybody's in an indie rock
Six
band in
bands,
Raleigh.
yeah.
And so we, you know, 400 people in this kind of much smaller space than this. That was the only time we ever given one of these speeches where I felt like we needed one of those chicken wire things in front of us, because people were going to start throwing things. Because, you know, at the end of the day, you have to sort of say to yourself, you know, they were saying, well, we're not getting paid for our music. And I said, have you ever asked yourself, do you suck? And they didn't like to hear that.
There is that possibility.
You know, as critics, we can tell you that a lot of people make music, but there's very little of it that actually changes your life. You know, there's a 5 to 10%, 10% if you're lucky, that's really genuinely great. And there's a lot of mediocrity. And mediocrity, you know, God bless them. You know, if you love what you're doing, keep doing it. But at the same time, are you entitled to get paid for it?
A lot of the happiest musicians we know that we've ever interviewed have not had to rely on making their living making music. They do it because they love to do it. I have a lot of poetry students. I don't know why. Columbia College still has a thriving poetry program, okay? Those kids don't think, I'm going to get out of college, I'm going to get a kick-ass job as a poet. You know? They know that this is their love, this is their passion. They are studying it. I'm sure they would like to get a kick-ass job as a poet, or maybe they'll teach someday. But they, you know, they're not saying that. And what gives musicians the right, you know? Journalists is a little bit of a different story, because when the New York Times can't afford to send a journalist to cover the war in Afghanistan on the ground, then we're in serious trouble as a democracy. What we do as rock critics, yeah. If the world never pays another rock critic.
Pretty small stuff by comparison.
But he's got a question forever.
Thanks. I had a question about shaping taste in digital era. It seems like pre-digital music, you would have had music stores where people were hanging out for 8 hours, and maybe in the course of their spending 8 hours looking for an obscure album, they'd bump into you and tell you about an album that was going to change your life or something. So that would be like one way you might hear about things. Also, you'd have DJs, I think, had more autonomy on the radio. You could have Freed or somebody introducing you to rock and roll or something like that. But now it seems like we've got fewer avenues to buying music. iTunes online store is great, but it's the biggest retailer, and I think as more and more music gets purchased, like from them and Amazon and stuff, more and more of music, what you could even find out about would be driven by algorithms, by some kind of a search engine, or by like just a couple of companies, or by like Clear Channel. Do you think that things like blogs and the discussions on them is enough to draw people into new things, or do you think there are other ways that people will find out what's coming out now that Greg isn't at record stores 8 hours every Saturday for us to learn
This is the only reason we don't slit our wrists. You know, because we love journalism as much as we love music. We believe in the need of what academia and think tanks about this sort of thing are coming to call the curated experience. With more art of any form, music, our specialty, available than any time in the history of mankind, right? And I mean, we're really hurtling there. We are perhaps 5 years or 10 years away from, you know, being able to press that button and getting any movie we've ever wanted, any movie in the history of cinema. You know, D.W. Griffith to Human Centipede 2. Boom, it's all there. Well, so what you're going to do is you're going to be looking at every piece of music ever recorded, every movie ever made, every book ever written, you know, and you're going to like be paralyzed. Where do I start? I'm just going to go to bed, right? What you need are voices to guide you through that, as always. And this doesn't have to be, you know, middle-aged white guy critics for newspapers. I mean, it has to, you know, it's part of a discussion online, a community. I think criticism at its best is people talking about ideas that come from this art. And I think that you know, you're going to go and say, what did Greg Kot say, you know, about were the best albums this year, you know, and that's where you start. Or what did, you know, Roger Ebert or David Edelstein say were the movies I had to see? You know, we're going to need that more than ever, I think. You know, whether they write for the New York Times, whether they're bloggers, that doesn't matter. I mean, what I tell my kids in the professional writing program is professionalism is earned. Doesn't mean you're getting paid to do this writing by a fancy media organization. It means that you write up to professional standards. You know, that you're still someone who believes in the power of art and that you critique it, you know, with substance. And so you know, maybe it'll only be podcasts. Maybe it'll be stupid radio shows about guys talking about music. I don't know. But we're going to need a guide through this universe.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's so much music being created. Everybody needs, you know, critics need guides. And I think, you know, that experience, the curated experience, as you said, you know, my example is, you know, you can stand outside the gates of Siena, this amazing medieval city in Italy, and walk through it on your own. And have an experience, or you can have that, you know, that kid who's lived there all his life take you through it. And it's going to be a different experience, but it's going to be, oh, wow, that's what's cool about this. And now I understand why that's so great. Oh, you mean, you know, St. Catherine walked these very streets in the 15th century? And, you know, that's the kind of richness of that experience that you're looking for. And you can find those voices. The net is full of them. The thing is, again, just like with anything, any other creative endeavor, you know, there's 5% of them that, you know, you'd actually want to read more than once. You find them, you stick with them, you're going to have a certain type of experience. The beauty of it is you can have a very rich experience because the options are there. I mean, back when we were growing up, you know, there was Cream and there was Rolling Stone and there was the Village Voice and a few other places, but now it's times 30, you know. It's amazing what you can find to sort of curate your musical experience, and it's a wonderful thing. And also, I'm making a really hard case here to justify my job. So I hope it continues for 5 more years, at least until I get my kids through college. But, you know, to get back to the point, oh, there is another question. I want to take that.
Hi. As a tangent, I would argue that it's as important to pay an artist as it is to pay a journalist to go to Afghanistan, but that's a side note.
That's a good gift.
My question goes back to actually something someone asked earlier. Part of the reason that I can't purge my collection of albums and CDs is that the liner notes are really critical to me. I love learning what influences artists. I love learning who the lyricists are and the composers are. I love learning who the musicians are. And it gives me a much broader picture of who the artist is. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what, if any, are the implications of, with the digital music age, the microcosm that people are perceiving that the artist is the music versus all the other contributing factors to who created the music and who influenced the artist.
So, but you're an extraordinarily dedicated listener. We have to assume, you know, that 9 out of 10 people probably don't care, don't ever read the liner notes or don't ever look at that stuff, and that's fine, right? I think what we're starting to see is artists are realizing they have to do more. They have to be more creative. They can put out special, you know, handmade art. You know, we've seen Trent Reznor of 9 Inch Nails do this, and Radiohead do this, and Jill Sobule do this, great singer-songwriter. You know, we can the special edition that has the liner notes, the handwritten lyrics. And there are some people that want to collect that and own that, and there are other people who only care about the music being digitized, and maybe they don't even care about the whole set of songs, they just want one song. People are spending money. It's extraordinary that the numbers when they came in for Radiohead's experiment, or for a similar experiment that Nine Inch Nails did, it was only 1 out of 10 people that were really spending money, but those people, how much did Radiohead make? More than $1 million.
Well, yeah, they ended up, the extraordinary thing about the Radiohead experiment, they basically offered that music for free for 2 months. A ton of people accessed it. About a third, I think, actually ended up paying for it.
But then there was the
And
special
then they
vinyl.
went, but then they ended up, well, they offered it as a box set. They sold out of those. They made like $1 million on the limited edition box set. This whole notion of scarce goods by somebody that you really love. You're going to buy that thing.
That's going to go onto your IKEA shelf that
Yeah.
defines you.
And then, 2 months later, they actually did put the record on sale as a physical product and as a paid-for digital download, and they ended up having the biggest selling album of their career. So figure that one out. Anybody could have gotten the record for free from Radiohead themselves for 2 months, and yet they had the biggest selling album of their career.
But they worked really hard and offered it in a number of ways.
Right.
So that the person who cared about the liner notes or the art and the whole package. Is that answering what you were asking? Pretty much. We're starting to see this creativity. What else can I do to make money besides play live, which always was my main thing.
I also think one of the fallacies of this is that because everybody can access it this way, all this other stuff is going to go away. I actually think it's actually going to encourage. We're actually seeing a resurgence in vinyl sales.
It's the one segment of the only segment of the music industry that's been on the uptick.
And it's not just fogies like us, it's the 19-year-old kid in the dorm.
Well, that's where the IKEA thing came from. We keep interviewing record store owners who are saying people are coming in and they love the Bon Iver album. They want it on vinyl. And we've interviewed, I don't know, half a dozen record store owners who always say, do you have a turntable? They don't.
Yeah.
They don't even have the turntable.
They can't afford the turntable, but
they're
they want the
spending $20 to own this thing because they love this album. They've got it, digitally on any number of their devices. But this is the thing they want to keep, this totem. We're not moving to an entirely post-physical world.
I think we're moving to a world where more choice is available, and I think ultimately that's going to be a positive step. But the question is, more choices for consumers. Is an artist going to be able to make a living off just releasing a physical product? No, he's going to have to give a wide array of choices. When you hear the manager of the now former REM, Bertus Downs, just a few weeks ago, I was talking to him, and he was saying, it's going to be about little revenue streams for all these artists. It's not going to be just one big pool of cash that you get from Warner Brothers. It's going to be all these little streams of income that are going to sustain artists from now on. And if you're at the REM level, it's probably not going to be an issue. But for artists a little further down the pecking order, it's going to be kind of a hand-to-mouth existence. And was it ever any different for artists?
Well, it's never
a
been
question
any
you can
different.
ask.
Those people were always plumbers or carpenters
Yeah.
and then made art. And, is it right that REM in its last contract with Warner Brothers sold, was it an $80 million deal?
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense? Now we could say, well, what about Hollywood, okay? Is it like, well, does the world need Avatar? Do we need a movie made with the budget of a small African nation, right? Because the trade-off is you can also go and make something like Blair Witch Project, right? You now have the same way that the recording artist has all the tools of Abbey Road in that little box, the ability to make movies now. And then, you can get the world to see it, right?
Yeah.
I personally am not against the notion of a much smaller world with better art.
Well, I think
I really won't cry for Lady Gaga.
What you want or not, it's inevitable, because I don't think they are going to make avatars anymore, because you're going to be able to download it from the cloud, and you're going to be watching it on your cell phone. So Avatar on a cell phone, okay? Does that make sense? And why would you want to spend, $18 gajillion making a movie that some kid is going to download for free, and watch on his iPod or his iPhone?
We're firing 12,000 librarians in
Yeah.
Chicago,
Well, I
and we
know.
won't pay our teachers, but we're making Avatar.
It is absurd. I'm just saying that world is ending. And that $80 million contract that REM signed, that was in 1997.
Right.
In 2007, that didn't exist anymore, and it's
Right.
certainly not going to
And that's
exist
not a
in
bad
2017.
thing, right? We're on the same page about that.
No,
Good
exactly.
riddance to it.
Exactly.
Little streams of revenue. It seems more like no streams of revenue for an awful lot of musicians. And that would be more of the world, as you say, people working as carpenters on the side, trying to make a living while playing music. My favorite variety of music, the music I play, not well, but the kind of music I play is Renaissance and medieval music. Talk about a small niche, particularly a recorder. I don't know of a single musician who makes a living at all playing a recorder anywhere in the United States.
Yeah.
But it's gorgeous music.
Yeah.
Even at like Ren Fair?
You get nickels and dimes for that.
You get
except-
turkey legs,
but-
right?
See,
you
here's-
get turkey legs, yeah.
Here's the thing.
But the issue being, we've had a couple of house concerts in our house, and they're great. We had a great time. And I talked to musicians later, and they say, this is the only time we ever make any money at all year. Yeah, we go on tour, and if we're lucky, we make enough money on tour to cover the gas and lodging.
Right.
We go to a venue to play, and if the owner of the nightclub or bar or whatever is really nice, he'll give us free beer. Because there's so many bands out there that you not only don't make any money recording, you certainly don't make any money traveling and performing either, because there's just so much competition, and as you say, there's just so much that aren't that good,
Right.
including me. So I would be very happy to make a sign that says we'll play a recorder for food. If I get to play and then get free snacks afterward, that's terrific.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be the future of music, and that's also probably the past of music.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you talk about revenue streams. I don't see any revenue streams anywhere for almost any musician these days, especially with the huge number of bands that have proliferated in recent years. So we have recording, we have traveling and performing, we have house concerts, and you have a job at Starbucks, and that's where you make your living, and you do it because you love it until you get tired of it, I guess, or maybe you don't. But the whole question of revenue is not how do I make a living, but how do I get any revenue at all?
Yeah.
And
But let's be realistic. There probably are 100 people in the United States who make a living playing recorder, right? There probably are. No, there's got to be.
says no.
Like, don't symphonies have a recorder player, or does the flautist cover it?
once in a while,
Once in a while. All right. Well, let's make it a little bit. Let's say double
They play
bassoon.
flute, too.
Or let's say French horn player. Okay. There's 100 people in the United States of America who make a living
classical
playing.
music in general, and
Right.
Renaissance is a very small niche of a very small niche.
Right. But this has always been the case. And
Sure.
and what's wrong with that? Who says that the recorder player should be Mick Jagger? I don't think Mick Jagger should be Mick Jagger. What I'm saying is that brief. Well, no, really.
James Dean used to play
that
recorder,
man
by
has
the way.
made more money than like his
Really?
children's. It's just wrong. And it's going to have proven to have been an historical blip. That's it. There was 50 or 60 years where some people got absurdly wealthy, making music, and that's in the whole history of mankind,
Okay.
right?
So content ourselves with going back to where we were before, getting together with friends and jamming and having a good time and leaving it at that.
Because you
That's
love
what
it.
it's about,
Because you
yeah.
love it, right?
Exactly.
You love it.
Right.
And that's, whenever I go to I get asked to speak to journalism classes, as Jim does a lot, and, I go in there and I say, it's nice to be in a room full of crazy people. It's like, because I feel like I'm one of you. I feel like I know exactly what you're thinking right now. You're not going to make any, people thought there weren't jobs, now or whatever in creative endeavors, including journalism. That was the case 30 years ago, too. They said, there's no jobs. Nobody's going to get paid. We still did it. We still wanted to do it because we couldn't think of anything more that we wanted to do. And I think that, forming a band is that same kind of absurd, I don't care, but I love it. I'm going to do it no matter what kind of impulse. It's a basic human impulse to want to create stuff. That's never going to go away. And I think it's a wonderful thing. I hope there is some way that we can end up rewarding these people. But as Jim is saying, the odds are against it. It's like it's not likely that you will make a good living creating stuff. It's only the very top tier of people that are able to do that, and the rest of them are doing it because they love doing it, and they can't think of anything else they'd rather be
And
doing.
it's not just movies or music, it's movies, it's poetry, it's short stories, it's novels, it's everything.
Sure, absolutely.
So
Absolutely. How
you
many people do you
pursue
know
it
are writing
because
their novel or their
right.
screenplay right now,
Yeah.
Or painting,
Painting, any kind of the visual arts, right?
Right.
So you pursue what you love.
Right?
Right.
And so that seems like we want to point the question in a different way.
But the
You make your living, you're not going to get health insurance through recorder playing.
Yeah.
But if you're married and have 2 kids and you're thinking about college expenses, then you have to start thinking in terms of
Sure.
thinking about music, thinking about creativity in a different way. That this is something I do on the side, or this is something that I use to express myself, but I don't use it as a means to make a living.
Yeah, but
or
see, the
anywhere
story,
close.
the story isn't done being written,
Right.
right? Let's say you're so inspired by our silly talk here tonight, you go home and you record something on the recorder that nobody's heard before, right?
never will hear.
And you know, I don't know, your friend films it and you make this witty video and it's on YouTube. And you wake up in the morning and you've had 15 million hits, right? Martin Atkinson, who is kind of an insane, crazy drummer, thinker, educator, does this Future of Music speech too. And he says, your problem is not that people are illegally downloading your music and listening to it, it's that they're not. Okay? You know, yesterday, Morrissey was supposed to play in Chicago on Thursday night, and he was seen all over town, you know, at Reckless Records, and he was at Myopic Books, and he went to Graham Elliott to have a vegan dinner, and then he suddenly canceled his gig after it had sold out. Apparently his guitarist had visa problems, but a really smart young Chicago musician named Elia Einhorn recorded, in the space of an hour, a song called Morrissey in Chicago, and he put it up on YouTube. There's no video, there's just a picture of Morrissey, and it's Morrissey's in my town, oh, 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 you know, right? And it's very, very funny, as all these jokes. He's at Reckless, which one? Wicker Park? No, Broadway, oh yeah, he's gay, right? It's very, very funny. And it has a couple of million hits because everybody who cared about Morrissey suddenly thought this was very funny, right? And Elia, you know, Elia has a career. Elia is one of those insane people who love it so much. Scotland Yard Gospel Choir, you read this story in the Tribune perhaps, or when I was still at the Sun-Times. They were touring, you know, eking out that living of playing a couple of hundred people a night, a couple of $100. They got in a horrible accident on the highway in Indiana. The drummer almost lost his life. Elia was in the hospital for 6 months. I mean, they were really hurt. And they're doing it again, okay? But what he has now is the ability, you know, to reach those million people overnight that never existed before, right? And then it's up to you. If a million people care about you, there's got to be some way to monetize it.
And
Sell a T-shirt with a recorder on it.
And the point here is that music is creating a crowd, an audience like never before. I mean, there's you know, to be able to do something like that and have a million people access something that you've done, you've drawn a crowd. There's got to be a way in the next 10 years to create a business model that takes advantage of that opportunity. More people are listening to more music than any time in the history of the world. You know, is that a bad thing? You know, it doesn't matter how they're getting it right now. It's like there's going to be a business model that's going to take root and be able to find a way to perhaps not create this hierarchy of the Rolling Stones and everybody else, but actually create sort of like a middle class, make a middle class living possible for somebody who's creating stuff. You know, I'm thinking $70,000 a year might be a nice number to shoot for in 10
Well,
years
talk
from
about
now.
the Jill Sobule model.
Well, Jill Sobule is this folk singer in California who basically she asked her fans to fund her next record, or the record that she put out actually a couple of years ago. And now we actually have a website called Kickstarter that is basically based on this model of, you know, ask your fans to contribute. You know, it's like a tip jar model, you know, contribute, you'll help me make a record. If you contribute X amount, I'll put you in the liner notes. If you contribute Y amount, I'll sing a song about you. If you contribute Z amount, you'll be the executive producer. You know, I mean, it's all these different like levels of, you know, ownership. You become not just a fan, a consumer demographic, but you become a co-conspirator, a collaborator. And that's where we're heading toward, where the fan becomes part of the experience. And that's a very, very exciting development, where the fan is no longer just being sold stuff to, but is now actually becoming part of the process. And I think that's the development we're going to see in the next 10 years. There was I don't know who was first.
Jim, you teach at Columbia College. I also teach at Columbia College. We know why we do it. It's not for the money.
Yeah.
But
true
with,
love.
Exactly, it's true love. With tuition costs going through the roof, with kids going into hock up to their eyeballs, is it valid for a young man or young woman to pursue a music education with the intention of going into the business and making a success? Is that the valid way to go?
To be a success? No, hell no. No. No, but I mean, it's as insane to study poetry or journalism or fashion design or any of the, you know, I mean, my classes are full of filmmakers, fashion designers, video game designers, graphic designers. You know, your chances are you know, kind of slim. But they're doing it because they love it, you know, and then you'll figure out how to pay the bills later. I don't know if there is any sort of education that can prepare you for the music industry because there's no more music industry.
Well, that's the beauty of it, though. They're the rules. You can kind of invent the rules now.
Yes.
You can create the rules. I mean, you know, there's a kid in his basement now. We used to say that there's a kid in his basement now making the next great record. There's a kid in his basement now that's going to be the next president of, you know, the next great music startup.
Well, I mentioned Pitchfork earlier. Ryan Schreiber was a kid in his parents' basement. He was in Minneapolis, you know, in the suburbs, Eden Prairie or whatever. He starts Pitchfork, and now it was just on a list the other day of Fortune or Forbes or something as the 17th most successful blog, and it made something like $16 or $17 million last year. They pay the writers about $50 per 3,000-word shitty review. But Ryan's doing all right. All right,
But,
so
you know,
it is possible.
There's a kid who lived in poverty. I mean, we make fun of him, but basically
We
living
didn't make those
poverty-level
17 million.
existence for 10 years.
Yeah,
you
right,
know?
right. Well,
As
so
we
do
all
we.
did. Yeah.
Oh, Mr. Kot, you actually spoke at my high school about 10 years ago when Napster
Oh,
was
and you
at
came
its
back?
height. Yes.
Wow.
And that
Thank
was when
you.
journalism
Did he ruin your
was
life?
over
Thanks.
and the music industry was over and everything was collapsing. And I'm a journalist now, and I'm back. My question was about the single. You were saying how a single is great for consumers, but at the same time, wouldn't you say that it's not great for paying bands? And I mean, you have your Kesha and all of these people who are making money off of singles, but doesn't that crowd out the small bands who make money by selling albums? And wouldn't that be better for the industry in general, for the bands to be just sticking to selling albums?
Well, I mean, everybody wanted, I think the industry model was based on the idea that the album, you know, you want to sell albums because they cost more money. But I think I think I'm looking at it more from a consumer standpoint. Like, if you're an unknown band and you've made an entire album and you're asking people to pay $15 for it or $10 as a lot of bands do on the road, you know, is a fan willing to make that sort of investment on sort of an untested thing versus, you know, you give them kind of an affordable entry point. And that's what I think the music industry kind of missed the boat there in the 90s. There was so much money making from CDs at that point that they just cut out the single. They just cut out that step. So now the entry point for a lot of people, for most of us, it was that single. It was that 45 or that single. Wasn't there anymore. And when it suddenly became available digitally, you know, they gravitated toward that. You know, hey, I just want to hear a song. Or I want this song off this Black Eyed Peas record, you know? I don't want the whole record.
You have to remember how artificial the pricing is. Because, you know, CDs cost some pennies to manufacture. And the record industry puts on top of that, you know, shipping costs and packaging costs and stuff. But, you know, when vinyl was replaced, the vinyl album was selling for about $9 or $10. And it was replaced by the CD, and the record industry promised us that, yes, this costs more now. It's about $13 or $14. But once this becomes the new norm, the price will go down. And that never happened. It only went up and up. And you had artists like Tom Petty suing his own record company saying, this is absurd. You're selling my CD for $14.99 and then $15.99 and then $16.99. It should be like $10. What do you especially because I get like 15 cents out of it, right? And Tom Petty didn't have the Madonna deal and wasn't as bad as others, right? So it was greed. It was sheer greed. I mean, you know, Bernie Madoff and the mortgage scene had nothing on the record industry, and it got out of control. Versus punk bands or traveling recorder players who, you know, go across the country and they have their recording, they sell it for $5, and they move a bunch of them from the merch table if they're any good. If they suck, they don't. But you know, I mean, and that's the economy we're back at.
But, and you know, given that we're back at, you know, Depression era type things, wouldn't it be great if we had like a WPA now sorting, you know, some of the musicians out so we could have someone supported and some artists paid for by you know, a WPA?
You probably like Obamacare, too.
What are you, a
How
socialist?
could you tell?
I'd like to
Socialism.
eliminate 3 government agencies, but I don't know which they are.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of government, we really have to mention this before we go. I just want to put this across your radar. If you're not aware of this, there's a bill wending its way through Congress right now. It's called the Intellectual Property Protection Bill. And basically what they're saying is the government is eventually going to get involved in this issue, as it has in France and a number of other countries around the world, where basically they're going to monitor what you're accessing on the internet. They're going to get the ISPs involved, the internet service providers, to monitor the behavior of their users and basically say, determine whether or not you're illegally downloading intellectual property, copyrighted files that have been licensed to license holders who want their money for this property. So there's a bipartisan faction actually in Congress that's saying, hey, this is a good idea. It's costing us jobs, and we're gonna get this bill through. There's a fundamental disconnect between not only the way copyright law is currently written, but also this particular bill. It's a fact that about 50%, if not more, of the American population is engaging in some form of what is considered illegal conduct in the way they trade files. And I'm not just talking about music files. I'm talking about movies. I'm talking about published material, images, etc. Because it's part of what the internet does. The internet is a file trading mechanism, And do you think most people are sitting there thinking, is that a copyrighted file? Who owns that copyright? Am I going to have to pay them, a royalty? They don't care. They just, hey, this is cool. Check this out. And sending it to a friend. Well, that's technically, you're in violation of the law. So if the government gets involved in this, gets the ISPs to start monitoring you, basically the idea is a 3 strikes and you're outlaw. You get 2 warnings that you have traded in contraband material, and on the 3rd time across, you're going to get pulled off the internet. So that's the potential reality of the situation in the next year or two. And that's not as far as I'm concerned, that's not a happy scenario. I'm all for creative people getting paid, but I'm not sure I want the government involved in terms of monitoring our activities in what we're doing in the privacy of our own homes.
I think that'd be about as successful as the Volstead Act.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Pot theoretically is illegal as well.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's probably where we should end.
Yes. Thank you.